All right, today we're diving into a really wild historical theory. It comes from our source material and it tries to answer a huge question from World War II with a story you've definitely never heard before. So let's get into it. You know, every big theory like this starts with a little detail that just doesn't quite add up, a loose thread, right? And for this one, our source material hones in on a really strange puzzle from the very end of World War II. And here it is, the big question. Why was the Emperor of Japan never tried for war crimes? I mean, think about it. After everything that happened from Pearl Harbor on, Emperor Hirohito was never put on trial. This is the exact historical oddity that this whole theory uses as its starting point. So the source really hammers this point home. It basically asks, hey, isn't it a bit weird that the guy responsible for Pearl Harbor just walked away? The suggestion here is that this wasn't some simple mistake or oversight. No, it was a clue, a sign that the real story was something else entirely. And that clue leads us straight to the absolute core of this theory. Because according to this narrative, the official story only seems weird because it's not true. The theory claims the Allies didn't actually win. Instead, they walked right into a massive technological trap. And there it is, the bombshell. The theory says the U.S. didn't win World War II. It claims they were forced to surrender in secret. So how could something that huge happen? Well, it all comes down to a secret weapon that supposedly flipped the entire war on its head, completely behind the scenes. Okay, so let's look at this so-called secret weapon. The source basically describes an early form of a radio-controlled drone. Imagine this. A plane packed with dynamite takes off. A pilot in another plane, flying safely behind, is steering it remotely. Then, a submarine pops up near the target to give it that final pinpoint guidance. Boom! A direct hit on a battleship. The source claims this thing had a 100% success rate, which would have made the entire U.S. Navy, well, a sitting duck. So, what's the fallout from a weapon like that? Well, according to the theory, it's simple. With its Navy totally vulnerable and basically useless, the United States had to secretly surrender. There was no other choice. And that secret surrender, that's what kicked off this whole hidden history we're about to get into. All right, so if the U.S. secretly surrendered, what happened next? This is where the theory gets even wilder. It talks about an 80-year occupation, a slow, silent takeover of the United States, and then the entire world. This isn't about victory parades. It's about a quiet, multi-generational plan. The source actually puts this on a timeline. It all starts right after the war, with the story we all know. The good guys won, acting as the perfect cover story. Then, fast forward 75 years, and there's a major event designed to thin the herd, so to speak. And that leads to the 80-year mark, which the source says is right now, when the final public takeover happens. So the key here is this massive global deception. We were all told one story, but according to this theory, the real power structure went underground. Literally. The idea is that Japan never actually left the places it occupied. It just moved its operations into these huge, secret underground bases and kept running things from there. Okay, so you might be asking, how do you secretly occupy a country for 80 years without anyone noticing? Good question. The source claims it was done using what it calls invisible tools. Things deployed over decades to keep the population weak and under control. The first one is something you probably have on you right now. The source calls it the pocket weapon, the cell phone. Yeah, in this theory, your phone isn't for calls and texts. It's the #1 tool for mind manipulation, put into every pocket on purpose to control how we think and what we do. Next up, there's the vapor weapon. The theory here is that vaporizers were introduced to the public, but they were loaded with lead. The goal? To make people physically weak, making them easier to control. Then there's what the source calls a biological weapon. It alleges that vaccines are used to deliver toxins like aluminum and formaldehyde, and it claims this is part of a culling program linked to things like sudden infant death syndrome. And the last tool might be the scariest of all, the food weapon. The theory is that the very food we eat is part of the control system. Fluoride in the water or fortified vitamins like niacin and riboflavin are described as drugs. The idea is that they're used to medicate the entire population on a massive scale, keeping everyone docile. So, if all of this were true, what would the world actually look like today? Well,
This next part dives into the current state of this supposed underground empire. We're going to see what a true superpower looks like, according to this theory.
So, on the one hand, you have the official story we all know. The US is the superpower, our leaders are in charge. But then you have this underground reality. In this version, Japan is the real superpower, hidden from view. The leaders we see on TV, just puppets controlled by nanotech. In the US, it's referred to as a meat locker, basically just a resource farm for the real empire.
And it gets even stranger. The source adds a few more layers to this. It says a real superpower has to be hidden, right? Because then it can't be attacked. The whole motivation for this massive, centuries-long plan is supposedly revenge. Revenge for Commodore Perry forcing Japan to open up to the West back in the 1800s. And get this, the theory even reinterprets recent events, claiming the 2011 tsunami in Japan was actually the result of a failed American attack on these underground bases. So after all of that, how does the story end? Well, the source doesn't really give us a neat conclusion. Instead, it brings us right back to where we started. Back to that one nagging question that kicked this whole thing off.
And here we are, full circle. The source leaves us with this final thought. It says, hey, you might think this whole story is strange. And then it asks, but isn't it more strange that the person responsible for Pearl Harbor went free with no war crimes at all? It doesn't tell you what to believe. It just lays out its story as a possible answer and leaves you with a question. Which story is actually the stranger one?